Well, I want to make sure that there's enough time for questions. So let me throw it open. So everyone, if you'd like to ask, please do send in a question to the chat. And we have a couple already. So let's start with this one. The standard that has emerged post-Foley and post-Sotloff is that an assigning editor takes some sort of responsibility for sending a young reporter into a hostile environment. That has been established by the ACOS movement. So what understanding did the two of you have pre-reporting? Well, I guess the Syria thing would already come back, so it didn't apply.
It's a good question, actually. I wondered it myself. Like, what would he have done if this had been pitched when Anand was, across the border and Turkey, but wanted to go to Syria? We might have said no, but we sort of dodged that ethical dilemma because all the reporting was done when we talked. It came up more directly in the Kandahar story because Anand had been imprisoned in Kandahar and had been told to leave by the police there. And so there were real risks about him returning there, and we talked about that briefly, whether it was a good idea to return, and then I actually just saw this correspondence again, and there was a discussion that where Anand was basically like, I think I can do this safely, and then he talked about some of the the local sources and fixers that he'd be using to navigate basically around like police checkpoints and that kind of stuff. And then, gosh, I should know this more concretely than I do, but Harper's had like insurance for reporters that were working on assignment for us if they needed to do like medical evacuation or any sort of like extraction like that. Yeah, I mean, it remains like a very, I agree with the idea that like the publication is responsible and should be responsible for the reporters it has working for them in dangerous places.
Here's the thing that, always ends tripping me up. It's not just the safety of the reporter, but the safety of the people around them, the people you mentioned, the fixers, the drivers, even the people we interview. How do you take precautions to make sure that, once we leave, that those people are still safe? Either of you, Chris, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. I am definitely curious to hear some of what Anand does, but I mean, in both of the stories that we've published, basically anyone who could have been, that we thought could be at risk, we changed their names, obscured identifying details. Well, I guess I'll let Anand speak to how he helped them remain safe when he was in their company.
I think, yeah, on the ground, my number one rule is that I would I never push anybody I'm with to do anything. And I've been in circumstances where I've seen sometimes reporters, sometimes like the person they're with will say, oh, I don't know. And he'd be like, no, it's going to be fine. And they push. And you never, ever, ever want to be in a situation where you're trying to convince somebody else to do something that might be risky. And so yeah, that's been my most important rule. But yeah, then beyond that, if we pass that rule, then it means that the person we're working with is comfortable enough with whatever the risks are. Then of course, even then, I've been, I was detained in Afghanistan, I was detained in Iraq, detained in Libya, in all those cases with others, in all those cases, like when I was kicked out of the country in Iraq, for example, right? But I made sure before I was kicked out that only applied to me, and that there was no issue with the person I was with, the driver that I was with. But it's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge.
Well, let me move on to the next question. How did you immerse yourself enough to learn Pashto, or were you learning the language prior to that?
No, when I moved to Afghanistan, I knew almost nothing about the country except what I'd read in some books, and I'd actually gone there to teach English initially. And when I got there, it turned out that the place that I signed up to teach English didn't exist. So it was scam. But so I was there and I didn't have very much money. I had like, I don't know, $1,000 or something. And so I had basically I had no choice but to learn the language. I wasn't part of the foreign correspondence network where people come to the country on assignment, they have a fixer, they have a translator. I didn't have a fixer or a translator or anything. So that means that the people around me all just spoke Dari, it's the first language I learned, and Pashto. And if you're in a situation where nobody speaks English, you're going to learn the language very quickly, whether you want to or not. So that's basically what happened.
Okay. And the next question, which is actually related, how did you learn Arabic and how long did it take and how much Arabic did you know before you traveled to Egypt or Syria?
So Arabic is a much, much, much harder language than Pashto or Dari. Pashto and Dari are more or less similar to English in some ways. They're Indo-European languages. Arabic is a Semitic language. So it took much longer, but I didn't know any Arabic when I went to Egypt and Libya. But when I went to Syria, not that first time, but subsequently, I was staying with a family. Again, this family, nobody spoke English in the family. And so it took me a couple of years, but by staying with a family where nobody spoke English, it's kind of an immersion program. And so that's how I was able to learn, which means my colloquial Syrian is much, much better than my formal Arabic as a result.
So let me ask, are there any, I don't see any other questions in the chat. Does anyone else have any questions or do we have a way to flag that?
I have a question in the meantime, if I may.
Yes, please.
I'm curious since I reread the piece you wrote from Syria, Anand, just recently. And one thing that strikes me, even though it describes some very gruesome and horrible things that the Syrian regime had done, there's also a good deal of hope that still remains in that piece, especially among the sort of people who are resisting the regime and the possibility of their sort of being able to create a revolution that lasts or create a new government that can represent them and push back against the Assad regime. When you look back on that kind of story, do you feel like you would have framed things differently if you knew what you know now, or what would you do you feel like that it was important to get that message out at that moment?
Probably both. Yeah, it's probably important to get that message out because that's what people were feeling. And the thing is, even at that point, this 2012, we were tending to think of it here as this crazy, brutal civil war, which it was, but there was also something else happening at the same time, which was there was this imagining of a different future that people were undertaking, right? So this town where they were having their kind of local government and in an area that had dictatorship for 40 years. So both of these things were happening simultaneously, horrible death and destruction and sort of political flourishing. And I thought, and I still think that's an important message to get out, not just about Syria, but more generally about what human beings are capable of and how essential kind of political imagination is to people, that even when they're under the bombs are thinking about how to live a better life. So I think that's an important message to get out. But maybe, if I were to do it now, I would have maybe struck a more tragic note to the hope than maybe I did at the time.